Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. You can find all my videos and streams, all the replays on YouTube, and all the podcast providers, Spotify, Apple, under my name. And you could also find a lot of my work on Third Apron, my newsletter on Substack. I'm going to be in just going full speed ahead, releasing a lot of content on each team and their upcoming offseason, just preview what those might be like. And today, I want to talk about the Phoenix Suns. They were officially eliminated from playoff contention, I believe was last night or 2 nights ago. Already kind of lost track of time in this crazy schedule. And now seems like they're mainly just fighting to lower the lottery odds for the pick that they owe to the Rockets this summer. And joining me today to talk about all of this is one of the top guys covering the Suns. You can find his work and his daily streams as part of PHNX Sports, Gerald Bourguet. Gerald, are you relieved that this particular season is over? How are you doing now that it's finally all done?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the mental health check right off the top. It's been a tough season out here in Phoenix,
I gotta ask. I'm gonna ask whoever I bring on for the Mavs. I'm gonna ask whoever I already asked for my Sixers guy too.
Yeah, no, it's smart starting there. But no, there is a sense of relief that it's kind of over, even though you're looking at a team that if they lose these last 2 games, they could drop even further in the standings and give the Rockets an even better pick. But outside of that, I think everybody involved was kind of ready for this most disappointing season in franchise history to be over.
Yeah, I've got my uncle. He lives in Chandler, and he was really excited for the season. And I've kind of had to throughout just kind of like let him know just, hey, there's this thing. They're struggling right now, but to be honest, like it's not going to get that much better and this and that. And eventually he kind of got on the same page as me. And yeah, it's been just a very confusing season. So let's just kind of summarize what happened, because I didn't expect him to do this poorly at all. So I really thought they'd at least like stay the course. So to summarize last offseason, I'm just like looking at the list of all the moves that they did. They mainly ran the team back. They brought back Royce O'Neal, Grayson Allen, rewarded them with new contracts. And then they made what I think are the 2 biggest significant additions. And I thought this would really stabilize the team. The first was bringing in Tyus Jones on the minimum. Because one of the big reasons that they lost to Minnesota was offense and like surprisingly, and I think they needed a point guard to really organize things. And I always felt that, especially based on his play in Memphis whenever John Morant was that he could be a solid starting 5th option guard for a good team. And when you have as many mouths to feed as the Suns have, I thought that was a good fit. And it just did not work out. Eventually got demoted. The other was Mike Budenholzer, which I was really high on. I thought that he would at least raise the floor of the regular season and kind of put him at least being a 6 seed again, stay above the play-in, because that's what Mike Budenholzer does throughout the past 10 years. And they did not even make the play-in. Things got even worse. There's been some reporting for the past month or so. Maybe his future is uncertain. So there's a lot of different reasons that the Sun season failed like this. In your opinion, do you have like a top reason? Do you have like multiple that you would rank? I'll give you the floor on all that.
Yeah, it's tough because I think if you asked 10 different Suns fans what the biggest problem was this season, you would get 9 or 10 different answers, and they would technically all be right, which is the crazy part. It's been death by 1,000 cuts this season, and every problem has exacerbated another, to be honest with you. I do think you touched on 2 of the main ones. When you go out and add a point guard like Tyus Jones, all last year, everybody was saying they need a point guard, they need a point guard. They needed to take better care of the ball, but bringing in kind of an undersized point guard, and I like Tyus. I mean, that was tremendous value getting a guy like that on the vet minimum, a guy who has been one of the best backup point guards and best, kind of fringe stopgap starters in the league. Getting him for that value was great. But when they brought him into the equation, it made Bradley Beal's role, which was already all over the place the season before, even more uncertain. He's now 4th in the pecking order in terms of where he's getting the ball, how often he's getting it. And I think Tyus doesn't create advantages on the ball the same way that a Kevin Durant does, the same way that a Devin Booker does, even though, we all know he's the assist to turnover ratio god in the league history. So that one just really didn't work out. And honestly, they demoted him to the bench a little too late in the year, if you ask me. I think a lot of people here were clamoring for that weeks or even months before it finally happened. And Bud has been a big disappointment as well. I think, you look at his history in Atlanta and in Milwaukee, he just churned out 55, 60 win seasons there, was a top 10 offense, top 10 defense, and just really couldn't figure out this group. He didn't have a lot of the things he had in those places, like an elite, point of attack defender, a stretch five, those things that have been proven to work in his system. But the way that he has managed his rotations this season, the things that we've heard behind the scenes in terms of how easy he is to get along with, and I would just be surprised if he's back next season as the Suns head coach with the way that this season has gone. And then we'll touch on some of these, I'm sure, later, but the lack of a starting caliber center has killed them all season long. Their defense, it was awful. Under Vogel, it was borderline top 10, and under Budenholzer, it sank to 27th in defensive rating this year. Like, it's just been everything that could possibly go wrong has gone wrong, on top of the normal, which we saw last year, which is injuries holding Beal and Kevin Durant out a little bit.
So, yeah, if they fire Bud, then they would be on the hook for him. I think he got like a 4-year deal while also paying Vogel. They're no longer on the hook for Monty because that huge deal the Pistons gave him. Like, coaching contracts, I guess you can't really double dip, or I guess you kind of can, but but not really. There's like a whole thing where, once you get signed, the previous team gets off the hook. So, yeah, I mean, I would still be a little surprised if they cut him already, but I mean, it just seems like, hearing from yourself, a lot of the other people covering the Suns, that seems like it's getting louder and louder. I do have a top reason, in my opinion, that I think it's like kind of the root of, not necessarily the root, but if this isn't fixed, then why even continue doing this? And you could feel free to push back if you disagree. But I just think KD and Booker have not been good enough. And I think this team is, like, the theory is that they need to be like top 10, 15 players at least. And when you look beyond the counting stats, they just haven't even been that this season. Booker just not been as impactful. Durant, like when you look at a lot of the different like impact metrics, he might be closer to like giving top 30 production this season. Maybe he's better than that, but he's also getting older. So the way I'm looking at it is that if these guys can't even play at the level that I think they're expecting, and maybe part of it is the ecosystem, maybe they would do a lot better if a lot of the things around them was better. But I don't know. I feel like the Suns at the same time, you could say what you want about Matt Ishbia, but he invested a ton of money to make like a roster that on paper looks pretty deep. And I was I thought that they should at least be a playoff team. It's funny how I think the general consensus got the Pacific Division completely reversed, where I think most people coming in thought the Suns would win that division, and like the Lakers, Warriors, Clippers morass would be in the play-in or like outside of it, and like the Kings are kind of like exactly what we thought they would be. But everything else, in the Pacific Division, seems like we all got it wrong. But I mean, what do you and tell me what you think about that assessment about Durant and Booker, because I get the feeling that some of the trade rumors, like that they were discussing trades about him, they were like discussing him in trades ahead of the trade deadline, kind of tells me that they see that. They kind of see that maybe he's just not exactly the guy they were needing him to be.
I think when you have a season like this, everyone involved shares a sizable portion of the blame, and that starts with your leaders in Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. I wouldn't put them as the number one reason. I do think, like, Kevin Durant has mostly been same old Kevin Durant. Like, obviously, he missed more games this season than he did last year. I think last year he was only out for like 7 games, and that availability made a big difference this year because when he was out, the Suns were horrendous without him. And the same is true when Devin Booker was out. He had a healthier season this year, but obviously, like you touched on, wasn't as efficient, wasn't as impactful as a scorer. It's kind of strange because I feel like Book, knowing and sensing that, like, okay, Tyus Jones isn't creating the advantages we thought, I'm going to have to do more on the ball than I probably thought I was. He had his best playmaking season of his career this year. Not even just the career high in assists, but the way that he was driving and setting other people up. All the metrics in terms of secondary assists and potential assists. He was one of the elite playmakers in the league, but he did take a step back in scoring. He took more threes than he ever has in his career, and he just needed to be, average in that respect in order to bump up his profile as a scorer, and he couldn't do it. He had the second worst shooting year of his career in terms of 3-point percentage. He was still efficient when he got to the foul line. He was still efficient from the mid-range, but he took a lot fewer mid-range shots than he has in his career, and he didn't get to the rim a ton either. So I think he's going to have to be very meticulous in reorganizing his shot profile a little bit to what makes him a more efficient scorer, because I think a lot of us thought coming into this year this would be a year Book's averaging, 28, 29 points, kind of picking up the slack. And like you mentioned, this team can't afford for him and Kevin Durant to not play like top 10 players with the way that they're built, with the way that their cap sheet looks. It's very top heavy, obviously, with those three guys being about 150 million alone. I would put it elsewhere before them, but they were definitely part of the problem. And I think you saw at the trade deadline with Durant being dangled, they realized that this team, its genetic makeup in terms of its character, in terms of its personalities, they haven't had a guy that has that dog in them since like Jay Crowder and JaVale McGee days. Like it's been a minute since they've had those vets. People talk about Chris Paul, but the competitor that he is, the mind that he is, it made a huge impact, and it made Devin Booker's life a lot easier, especially as a guy who has not historically been a demonstrative vocal leader. So I hate to use body language and leadership to determine things like this, because at the end of the day, the roster around those guys wasn't good enough either. Neither was the coaching. The front office didn't put them in positions to succeed. But I think the front office understands that, like, in order to meaningfully retool around our franchise star, Devin Booker, we either got to find a way to get out of Bradley Beal's contract, which is going to be difficult no matter which avenue we take, or we've got to trade the guy who actually does have trade value and is one of those three guys that's making, over 50 million a year. And so Kevin Durant might wind up being kind of the casualty of that, in terms of your hands are tied and he's the only way that you can bring meaningful assets back.
So, okay, I think that'd be a good transition to get into the actual offseason. Because with Durant, I can't recall there's been something quite like this where a player, like right after the trade deadline, all the reporting seems to indicate, okay, yeah, this is over. They're going to work with each other on a trade. I can't recall if I've heard language quite like that this, there's a divorce, like, set in stone, it's going to happen. So we'll see if it happens. I'm not 100% convinced that they'll trade him. I think most likely they will, but I'm just very skeptical about the type of return they're going to get, because they're not going to get anything close to what they originally gave up for him. And I remember, and maybe I'm getting the details incorrect, but after the trade deadline, ESPN reported that they were talking about doing like a 3-way with the Heat and Warriors, where they would have gotten Jimmy Butler, Jonathan Kuminga, the Warriors first, which I think that's a pretty good value for Kevin Durant at this point of his career. I'm skeptical even something like that is still going to be available. And I'm sure there will be a team out there that convinces themselves that they are a Kevin Durant away from contending or whatever next step that they have. I just have a tough time identifying the teams. So I'll just mention some of them. Shams mentioned last week the Wolves, Knicks, Rockets, Spurs, Heat. And I just kind of pick apart all of them. I'd be very surprised if the Knicks, Rockets, or Spurs pursued him, given where they are. I could see Durant really wanting to join the Spurs and play with Wemby. The situation in Miami, that's really messy. I'm not sure how much better he's going to improve that situation. And the Wolves, I just don't think they really have anything meaningful to offer. They don't have any picks. So I'm not saying there won't be teams interested, but I just think there's reason to believe that the returns are going to be very underwhelming. In which case, do the Suns even consider trading him right now? Do they consider holding on to him despite everything that happened and just seeing maybe offers get a little better closer to the season or into even the trade deadline? I don't know. It's a tough situation. I mean, is there any package you kind of have in mind from any of these teams that you even think makes sense?
Yeah, so a couple of things before I get to that, because there's a lot to bear in mind with a Kevin Durant trade. The first thing is, like you mentioned, I don't know for sure that the Suns will trade him. I think, heading at this point that they're at, missing the play in, anything outside of trading Devin Booker is on the table for sure. And I do think that, them dangling him at the trade deadline without his knowledge, without his consent, was, that rubs a player of his caliber the wrong way. With that being said, he was very demonstrative about this when we talked to him about it after the trade deadline. He was saying, like, everybody keeps asking me whether I still want to be in Phoenix or whether I want to be traded. And it's like, I wasn't the one that tried to trade me at the trade deadline. Like, he's been pretty vocal about, I want to retire in Phoenix. I want to finish my career here. So I don't even know for a fact that he wants to leave. I think it might be a situation where, like I said, the Suns just understand if we can't get out of Beal's contract, he's kind of the piece that we have to move. And at that point, I think they would work on a trade together. And that's the key part is we've seen a lot of these superstars narrow down their lists to one team, two teams, maybe. If Kevin Durant does that, that's really going to suppress the potential value that Phoenix can get back. If he's got a wider net that he's willing to cast in terms of offers, then maybe you get a situation where one or two teams that fell disappointingly short in the playoffs talk themselves into, okay, we do need a Kevin Durant to push us over the hump. And I think that's where if you're a Suns fan, you're kind of rooting for the Rockets to fail early in the playoffs this year, because they could be a team that would be convinced, okay, we still need that guy, and Kevin Durant could be that guy, especially because the Suns would be tripping over themselves to do business with us if we give them, one of their picks back or something like that. So I think Kevin Durant is going to have to, if he wants to get to where he wants to be without his team depleting their resources, he might have to cast a few different teams. And I think if you're the Suns and you don't want to take a low ball offer for Durant, you hope that there's at least two teams to create some sort of bidding war against each other, because like you said, his value is not going to be what it was, especially since he has that, uncertainty with his contract looming overhead. Like, he's eligible for that 2-year extension. So he has the power to say, okay, if this team wants to trade for me, I don't want to sign a 2-year extension with you. So enjoy me for a year. And at that point, teams aren't going to give up assets for him. So there's a lot of factors that are going to complicate this for sure.
So that factor you mentioned about how he really does have a lot of control. He could really suppress his value if he wanted to. And it's kind of the same thing I've always been thinking about LeBron James over the past few years, that if he were to demand a trade, he can really control where he goes and what the package might end up being, because there's always that threat of retirement and stuff like that. And Durant's kind of getting to that point where he could really have a lot more control over that. But you're right. If there are some, he might not be able to get exactly where he wants to go, especially since there's just no, cap space isn't really a thing anymore, that as a mechanism to change teams, it's all through trade. Cap space is now just you have it and then you have the viable threat of signing the guy outright, which forces a trade. But then, so I think he'll definitely need to open up some of the, some of where the destinations a little bit to at least, help Phoenix out a little bit to get to an idea where he wants to go. But I did mention some of those teams, which I don't really I kind of got into. I'm not really a fan of those teams as a potential Durant destination. Do any of those stick out to you? And do you have any dark horse teams that you might have in mind? I've got a couple.
Okay, I would be curious to hear your dark horse teams, because truthfully, I haven't I've been waiting for the season to slowly bleed out so that I can then transition to off-season stuff. But yeah, so I think, like I said, I think if the Rockets flame out early in the playoffs, they'll be one of those teams that would make sense for me. I I like the Spurs in theory, but I think to your point, like there's a lot of uncertainty with Victor Wembanyama and the injury, the blood clots that he's dealing with. Also with Greg Popovich, when will he be back on the sidelines? So those are potential question marks that the Spurs will have to answer. Like, do we trade for a win now player like Kevin Durant if next year we're just kind of still building and developing? We're not ready to make that leap next year. Um, I don't hate the Timberwolves in terms of the potential players you could get in return, but to your point, like they're pretty depleted of actual draft assets, which if you're the Suns, you kind of got to aim for at least one first round pick for Kevin Durant if you possibly can. So, yeah, there's not a ton that's out there. Obviously, the Knicks are one of those teams that I think if they do flame out early in the playoffs, maybe they're a possibility, but I don't think you're getting the high value wings that you want in Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby for those guys. So it really kind of is slim pickings. I think the Knicks could be kind of my dark horse if they do go home a lot earlier than expected. But I would be curious to hear who yours are because honestly, we've kind of restricted our vision over these last few weeks to the teams that we keep hearing over and over again.
So I'll just quickly touch on a little more of those teams. The Wolves, it's just going to be difficult unless they're going to. I know Michael Scotto reported that they offered essentially what they got for Cat, which was like Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle type package. And that wasn't really possible this season. But once next season rolls over and they get below the second apron, they could do something like that. But if that's the offer, Phoenix is not going to take that. The Rockets, I remember when the Rockets and Nets made that pick swap, and then Woj reported that the Rockets might be interested in going after KD, but I just think Booker makes a lot more sense, and that's something we could touch on a little later. I just feel like that makes a lot more sense for if they're going to cash out on a lot of the picks that they have. And then the Knicks, I just don't really see them. Yeah, I don't see them parting with that core right now at all. I don't think they'll tinker with it. So I've got a couple in mind. They're a little crazy, but just kind of sprung to my mind recently because now anything could happen. You can't rule out any team after this crazy trade deadline. So I literally went through every team and two jumped out to me.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just bring in one other logical one that Shams didn't mention, the Mavs. I think that's actually kind of a logical fit because they can easily make it work. They can do a combination of Clay, Gafford, PJ, Najee, or Caleb Martin to make the money work. They've got 2 picks to offer, including what will probably be a lottery pick. If that's the best package available the Suns could get, I don't think that's it's definitely not great at all, but you can definitely it's just a way to reorient the roster. You get some picks, maybe some swaps. I could maybe see that.
I liked the Mavs. I liked the Mavs before Kyrie's injury. I thought they were a team that made sense. I think now with the injury, that's a little tougher for me to see happening.
Yeah, and so, but I could still see that happening. I think the Mavs make more sense than a lot of those other teams that have been thrown around recently. But here's number one. I'm keeping an eye on Denver. So okay. Jokic, he's going to be extension eligible this summer for 3 years, roughly $212 million. That could be the type of desperation move to get him to extend, especially after all the coaching, the whole overhaul that just happened. If there's any doubts in his belief in the organization, I don't know if that's going to be the type of thing that gets him to sign a dotted line, but it's kind of the same playbook the Bucks did with Giannis. Once they traded for Lillard, then he signed his extension. And I suppose the package would probably be something surrounding Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon. Nuggets can only trade 1 pick. So, I don't think that's also great, because The other thing to keep in mind is that Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon are definitely not going to be as good anywhere else as they are with Jokic.
Right.
But that's just something where the thing is, any Durant trade, you're just kind of like playing roulette, just kind of changing things up to see what works. And that's the unfortunate truth. So that's just one way. Maybe, you're trading your top wing in Durant, you're getting a couple back in Gordon and Porter Jr. I don't know. How do you feel about that one?
I could see it from Denver's perspective, absolutely. Like you said, like especially after what they just did, you're kind of running out of time and runway with the best player in the NBA's patience there. So I could see them making that type of gambit. I think for the Suns, like you mentioned, that I would I would not like that trade if I were the Suns at all, because
Yeah.
especially like like you mentioned, MPJ and Aaron Gordon are never going to be as good in Phoenix as they have been in Denver playing with Jokic. And MPJ, he's a flawed player, man. Even before talking about the off the court stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, you'd be getting younger. You would be finally addressing the four spot. I'm sure a lot of U of A people out here would love getting Aaron Gordon back, but yeah, that would be a tough one to sell to the
Yeah.
Suns as like, okay, we're still going to be competitive this year.
Yeah, but look, I might be wrong, but these are the
Mm,
types of returns I kind of see them realistically getting. It's not, it sucks, but
mm,
that might be it. It might be that type of return.
yeah.
Speaking of desperation, the other one I have. What about the Bucks?
Okay.
There's like two ways I could see this going. The one more
Okay.
obvious one is like Lillard for Durant straight up.
Mm,
Just another thing where the Bucks feel like that they flame out in the first round and they need to get Giannis on board again. Just another kind of thing. You're mixing things up. And then as I got a little deeper into it, I kind of put my salary cap mind into it. There is something that they could do that sends both KD and Beal to Milwaukee, because the Bucks don't really have that much to offer of outside of Lillard. But what if a lot of the value also came into getting taking Beal's contract, and I guess the Bucks were kind of linked to Beal. Maybe there's something there. So now you're talking like Lillard, Kuz, Portis, Pat, sign and trade some minimum guys to get the money to work, get a third team involved. It could happen. I did the math. But then again, at that point, you're not really getting too much, depending how you feel about Lillard and Kuzma and whatever, they have like one pick to offer. That's,
mm.
I suppose, like the primary value, but then the most of it is just the cost savings of also, getting off Beal, saving some money now. That is the other one where I got a little
Okay.
crazy, and I think, I could see the Bucks making a call.
Okay, living dangerously. I mean, I don't like it without getting out of Beal's contract being involved. I do like, obviously Book and Lillard have a lot of mutual respect for each other. Lillard has been very vocal the couple of years where he was injured for All-Star game, and he named Book explicitly as the guy who should be replacing him, and Book showed him love for that. They've spoke very fondly of each other, so that would make sense as a backcourt pairing to me. I do think like if you have to trade Kevin Durant and you can find a way to get out of Beal's contract at the same time, honestly, what you're getting back in return, unless it's like terrible contracts, long-term deals, I think that makes sense if you're the Suns. The savings, potentially putting yourself in position, depending on what's coming back, to get below that second tax apron that has become a problem for you, for a group that's not winning at the level that you need to be to justify being that far into the tax. So, um, yeah, I would love to see like the specifics of that type of deal, but I think it makes sense on paper in terms of you get out of Beal's contract and potentially don't have to give up, what little first round picks you have. Because that's the other part, is like if you're trading Beal, what sweeteners are you attaching to convince a team to take him? Is one first round pick even going to be enough? It doesn't feel like it for, like 90% of the league, probably.
Yeah, I would imagine the Bucks, if I don't know if either of the teams have to give up a first to each other, but
Mm,
if one had to, I suppose the Bucks, if they really wanted KD.
mm,
So, yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there's going to be some other dominoes that we can't even envision right now that fall that can open up some other possibilities. But I'm not even totally in love with my dark horses. Just something I'll keep an eye on. We'll see. Anyway, so just to summarize, I'm not very high on the KD market right now. Maybe I'll be wrong. We'll see how it changes. But just to touch on their financial situation, I'm pulling up the spreadsheet right now. So right now, where things stand exactly, they are going to be like, if they were to continue this, they would be going into the season next year, once they get to a full roster, about with like a $460 million team. It's not going to happen. A year ago, when I did my Suns offseason preview, the whole, like, the title was basically, hey, the Suns have 1 year left to make this work before they have this $500 million roster, because they'll be in the repeater tax. I mean, I don't know if they were just in it or they're about to enter it, but it's just going to be untenable if they don't, at least, in my opinion, make the finals. And they just didn't even make the plan. So right. They went ahead. So the other trade they did, they traded Yusuf Nurkic for Cody Martin and Micic. So they didn't make any savings immediately, but both those players are non-guaranteed. I think they made this trade with the expectation they'll get rid of both those guys so they can cut Cody Martin's $8.7 million salary, decline Micic's $8.1 million team option. There's already like a lot of reports that he's going to be going back to Europe. Seems like he might already have something done. So just by getting off those two alone, that saves like $100 million. So that's step one. So they then have like a $350 million roster, and they'd be about like $7 million above the second apron. So I bring up the Kevin Durant thing about maybe they don't trade him just yet, because if getting below the second apron's like the minimum requirement, they could do that with a Royce trade or Grayson Allen trade. If they need to hold off from doing something because they don't like the returns. But I think they're going to want to do more. I would guess they're going to want to save some more money. And I know that they've been, that ownership's been very aggressive. Money has not really been an object at all. But just based on what the season they just had, I'll just be curious to see how much they'll be prioritizing reducing that payroll. Because assuming they do trade KD, and they for lesser parts, and they have, considering the season they just have, I don't think they could justify a $300 million roster. I don't think they can even justify a $200 million roster. In which case, once you do trade Durant, you don't need to save like $20 million or anything like that. But I do think they'll probably compromise a little bit on the return for some immediate savings, especially if they're still stuck with Beal's contract.
Yeah, I mean, listening to Matt Ishbia from day one to last year when he made that bold declaration that 26 out of 29 teams would love to be in our position, he is always going to go for it. And I think at this point, we've spoken to this, the potentially suppressed market for Kevin Durant, the brutal options you're going to have to choose between in order to get rid of Bradley Beal this summer. I think realistically, they understand that they're going to have to take a little bit of a step back. And I think that they're going to prioritize that flexibility in terms of, if we can get below the second tax apron and open up more trade options down the line, open up, all of these things that we've been having our hands tied behind our back with, in terms of, can't combine outgoing salaries or all these different hurdles that they've had to restructuring their team. I think they would welcome that at this point. I don't think they're going to, trade Durant and or Beal just to do that, but I do think they understand the value of it at this point, because the team that they spent so much money on fell so miserably short. So I think, Booker's off the table. Outside of that, anything goes. I do think, obviously you're going to try to trade Beal first if you possibly can, but I would not rule out that they try to arrive at some sort of buyout with him. Not a full buyout, obviously, but enough of one to get them below that 15% threshold for dead money, because you can only have up to 15% of the salary cap amount in dead money. They already have Nasir Little and EJ Liddell in that respect, so they would have to get Beal to take, I think it's either 14 or 17 million dollars less than the full amount that's left on his 110 million dollars, and then they would stretch and waive that over 5 years, which long term probably not a smart move. But if you're trying to get out of Beal's contract right now, I would not put it past this ownership group to consider something like that.
Connected. Give me a sec.
Okay.
Okay, reconnected. All right, sorry about that, everyone. If there was like any brief glitch, it said I got disconnected. Okay, so stream's back. So I was saying that, it's just been the trade deadline, and it's only going to be like 6 months to the next trade, the off season. Doesn't seem like a lot of time has passed, but I do think it makes somewhat of a significant difference in terms of the ability to get off Bradley Beal in a trade, mainly because he's got that player option next year. And the new CBA has modified the rules in regards to what you can extend after declining a player option. So this Bradley Beal contract was signed in 2022, a year before the new CBA kicked in. And generally, the rule was that if you decline an option and you want to extend, the salary cannot be lower than what that option was going to be. So now we've started seeing a lot of older veterans sign extensions where they decline their option and take a lower amount and get like more money on the back end to kind of justify the pay cut in the short term. We saw that with Drew Holiday. He declined this $40 million option, took 4 for $135. Rudy Gobert just did the same thing. He had a $47 million player option for next year. He's going to make 35 next year instead. And it's a 3-year, 110 deal, I believe. Basically, they take like a 25% pay cut, and then they get like a lot of money on the back end. Now, Bradley Beal's situation is definitely a lot more complicated than those two examples. He's Holiday just helped the Celtics win the championship. Rudy Gobert just won Defensive Player of the Year last year. And it's really hard to project how impactful Bradley Beal is going to be going forward, where I don't know if there's a team out there that would want him to, and then with the goal of, with the purpose of giving him another long-term extension, even at a reduced amount. But I just want to bring that possibility out there that it is with that possibility now out there, like there could be a team that he, number one, wants to go to, but is also willing to give some type of long-term investment in him that makes the financial situation a little better for the team. But, you're still going to have to pay him like $30 to $40 million a year for it to make sense for him. So I don't know if there is something that makes sense. I would say probably not. In which case, I suppose I haven't got into the stretch option yet, but they're going to have to save like a good amount of money on the Durant trade first before like stretching Beal makes sense, because they got to have something lined up for that to make sense. And you already answered one of my other questions, if you thought there was any realistic chance they'd move Booker. You already said no twice. He's going to be extension eligible this summer. I wouldn't be surprised if they offer him an extension and he accepts it at $50 million. If I were him, I'd take that if offered, or anything even close to it, even if it's sub-max. If he takes it by August 5th, he can still be traded by the trade deadline, because my prediction is that, they'll trade Durant, they'll reshape the roster around Booker. Once that runs its course, maybe they'll have to start consider trading him. I think they will have to start consider trading him. But that's just the thing about Booker. I think they're going to try to salvage that as much as possible, but potentially even give him an extension. And we'll get into what a post Booker. I'll get into why the post Booker like life isn't really like the problems with that. But I do think they're going to salvage that a little more.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Booker, because I do think they are not even considering trading him. I think ownership knows he's the face of the franchise and that they've already in their short time here kind of frayed the trust with the fan base. So if you trade the guy who has been here for 10 years and has been, loyal to a fault, honestly, with how much patience he's given this franchise, I think they understand the way that that would look for them. I think Book is kind of one of those guys that even if he's not in that same tier as the Giannis, Jokic, Shea, those type of guys that can be the best player on a championship contender, he's just in Phoenix's eyes, he's just below that. And so I don't think they trade that unless he comes to them and requests out. I think it's going to be kind of one of those similar Damian Lillard situations where everyone is like, "Why have you stayed loyal so long?" But he even referenced it in that ESPN article the other day. You see guys around the league who think the grass is greener somewhere else. You'll never get the same love as the team that drafted you. I think he's a student of the game, an NBA historian. He understands the value that for guys like Kobe and Dirk and Tim Duncan who stayed for their whole career with one franchise, how they're idolized there. And obviously those guys were all-time greats who won titles. That's the difference that Book has yet to achieve. But I think for him, that's what he wants to do here in Phoenix. So until that changes and he forces his way out, I would be surprised if the Suns consider a Devin Booker trade unless it becomes clear to both sides that, like, hey, we've just got to move on. It's time.
Yeah. It might get to that point where it just run its course, but I agree. It'll probably just be up to the point until he wants it. It might be a while till they get a player quite like him again, especially given their draft pick situation. But I do want to get into why there, in case anyone watching is wondering, like, why don't the Suns just rebuild? I'm sure, Gerald, you've brought up why multiple times throughout the season. They just the way that they've traded their picks through 2031 prevents them from doing it. Now, there's been I brought up the Rockets earlier, where the Rockets could be a team that they have three of the Suns picks now, including this year, and then two future ones, 27 and 29. 29 it's kind of like a mix of different teams, and there's that idea out there that if Devin Booker does request a trade, the Rockets would make sense. The Suns get their pick back, get their picks back, and then they could rebuild. Except no, it's still not that simple, because they also traded out swaps in the years in between, in the even numbered years, mostly to the Wizards and other teams too. And I do want to get into that, because if any of you ever have been on the Real GM Future draft picks page, you might have seen how convoluted next year's Suns pick swap is. And I really want to touch on that, because I don't think anyone's really given this any attention. Because in case, basically, if you're thinking that, a lot of all the Suns, mistakes of the past few years are over, there's this one's coming. And I don't think anyone's really prepared for it. So they did, in 2023, they did the Bradley Beal trade. They did the Aiden Kamara trade. They did a bunch of stuff. They also did two very under the radar trades. I think everyone just completely forgot about them. And I'm gonna rehash them. First, they did a trade with the Wizards. No, I'm sorry, the Magic. They traded, where is it? It's a mess in here. Basically, they traded a 2026 swap to the Magic for 3 second-round picks. Then they traded with the Grizzlies a 2026 and 2030 first-round pick swap, also for 3 seconds, and also for the Grizzlies to take on the minimum salary of Isaiah Todd, save the Suns a little bit of money. So now they've been trading this derivatives of swaps of the same swap. And now that's kind of made it where they've essentially decreased what the value of the pick they can possibly get. And I'll give you an example. Next year's pick, they have swaps. It's swaps on swaps with the Wizards, which I would imagine they won't be worse than the Wizards. So I don't think that's going to work out. But then they also have a swap with the Magic and then the Grizzlies. So just as an example, let's say next year's standings play out similarly to this year. So the Suns are going to have what would be like, they would finish with the 8th or 9th worst record. So the 8th or 9th pick. The Magic are going to be like, I don't know, 16th, 17th. So the Magic get to swap that. So the Magic now have a mid lottery pick, and the Suns get a mid teens pick. Now the Grizzlies, they're projected to get 23rd this year. Now they get to swap that with what the Suns have now. So that would bring the Suns from a lottery pick down to like something in the mid to late 20s. And they've done this also with the 2030 pick. And I don't, they owe Wizards pick swaps in like 28 as well, 20 and all the other odd numbered years. I would guess the Wizards are going to be in a better place by then. So that's the thing where, when you think about why can't the Suns just like reset everything? They cannot. They put themselves in a position where for the rest of this decade, they have to make the most out of it. They got to try to win as much as possible. Because I don't know if there's like any combination of deals that they can do, like let alone just the Rockets one where they get their picks back. If there's something they can do with all these multiple teams to undo these swaps, I don't think there's like I don't know if there's surgery out there they could potentially do to undo this.
Yeah, and then that's a good point, and it's something to keep in mind when we're evaluating Kevin Durant trades over the summer. Is they're not going to give him up for a package of, exclusively young players or exclusively draft picks because, like you said, when they made these moves, they were banking on being a perennial title contender from now through the end of this decade. And part of that is just Matt Ishbia's outlook. He said it outright, like we're going to compete for a championship every single year that I'm here. And on the one hand, that just sounds like typical ownership talk, but on the other hand, it's his actual year in year out strategy, which can be short-sighted, which can be the reason why he was willing to give up these picks and these pick swaps, because in his mind, we're going to be better than the Wizards, we're going to be better than the Grizzlies, we're going to be better than the Magic. And obviously 2 out of those 3 bets are not looking like they're going to hit right now, and that's going to cost you your standing in the draft. I think from the Suns' position, they don't care as much, if you've dropped from number 8 or number 9 in the draft to number 22, 23, whatever. Obviously it hurts, but I don't think they care as much because they're confident in their recent draft history. And in their mind, this is something that has been said at press conferences, like there's this misconception that we don't have draft picks. Like we have draft picks. We're going to have a first round pick in most of these years, or at least in the even numbered years where we have pick swaps. We can turn those into somebody and near the end of the first round. We can do what we did with Ryan Dunn. We can trade into the second round like we did to get a guy like Oso Ighodaro. I think they're proud of what they've been able to do in the draft in recent years. Like they even tout Toumani Camara, even though they traded him right after. That was a good evaluation. But you're right. Like in terms of just resetting and rebuilding, you can't really do that because of what you've done to set yourself up in these next few drafts, as there are multiple teams that could have a chance to devalue our pick even more. So we're not going to blow it up. We're not going to reset unless, again, the number one guy that we're saying we're not trading comes to us and says, all right, it's time to blow things up for real.
Yeah, but again, like if they were to blow it up, it's going to require some sort of strategy we've never seen before. Like we've seen the Nets in the 10 years ago, Sean Marks managed to get them out of that situation they were in after the Celtics trade pretty flawlessly, but they didn't send out nearly as much equity. They sent out, I believe, 3 firsts, and really like 2 of them and one swap were really the ones that impacted them. We're just in the beginning, really, of this hole that the Suns put themselves in, with picks starting now and every swap in between through 2031, now that they traded that 2031 pick to the Jazz in that trade, which I don't think that's looking too good right now. So, it just kind of sucks to leave things at this kind of, this dread, but it just, Yeah, I don't know. It's just a rough situation they're in.
That's Yeah, that's pretty much the evaluation that's given here
Yeah.
in Phoenix. Like it's hard to find reason to hope. It's gonna all depend on what they're able to do this summer, how they're able to get out of Bradley Beal's contract, what kind of return they get for Kevin Durant if they do trade him, um, and what you do on the fringes too. Because you mentioned it earlier, like guys like Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, you're gonna have to turn those into assets of some sort because this team just did not work this year. Like it should have been a lot better. It shouldn't have been, they weren't going to be the Celtics or the Thunder or be in that contender category, but they were expected to be in the tier kind of below that one, and to not even come close to that, to miss the play-in entirely is embarrassing. And everyone involved has to do a lot of soul searching to figure out how you can put a more competitive team on the court next year, and which players in the locker room contributed to what you saw this year, which ones need to be on the way out and replaced with more size, more athleticism, more defense, more youth, because they're